Muting. And we're live. Fantastic.
Hey, good evening, and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel Month Club for the month of November 2020, the year that cannot end soon enough. Our book this month is The Sacrifice of Darkness, a really fantastic science fiction novel. I like this a great deal. It was a great book. We're very lucky to be joined by a full group of people, like more than we've had in quite some time. We've got Roxane Gay. We've got Tracy Lynn Oliver, and we have got Rebecca Kirby. And I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight to talk about the book, to talk about art and how we make it. And my first question is well, you can always boil it down. The first question is, why comics? I'm going to ask this maybe a little differently for the three of you. Because I'm really curious as to your individual answers. So, Roxane, I think I'll start with you. You are a New York Times best-selling author. You are a PhD in rhetoric of all amazing things. To wow, I mean, I couldn't even imagine doing that. You're a professor. Why comics? Of all the things that you do and can do, what is it that attracts you to the forum? Oh, no, we don't.
Oh, I got you.
Oh, here we go. Now you're unmuted. Sorry, go ahead. Excuse me.
I came to comics in a pretty unexpected way. Ta-Nehisi Coates invited me to write World of Wakanda for Marvel 4 years ago now. And I was really surprised by the invitation because I had never really thought about writing a comic. And then I did, and I loved it. And I think it's a really interesting medium because it forces me as a narrative writer to think more in terms of scene and thinking about the marriage between words and visuals. And it's just exciting to be able to tell action adventure stories. Most of what I write is really depressing. And so to just be able to tell action stories, which I actually read primarily, and I actually read a lot of thrillers and spy fiction. And so to have an opportunity to try my hand in those genres has been a lot of fun.
Nice. Did you read comics at all when you were younger?
I read Archie comics, which, are a different kind of comic, but I loved them. And I read them religiously. I had just hundreds of the Archie comics, and I loved the entire story of all the gang in Riverdale and their sort of hijinks, and it was just good, clean fun, I guess, but it was also really incredible storytelling, and it has been for more than 40 years. And so I read those, and then when I started to write World of Wakanda, and then The Bank, which I wrote for TKO Studio, I started to read things like Sex Criminals and Saga, Monstrous, and there's just some really amazing comics being made right now.
Yeah, no, there really are. I mean, one of the things I like to say is that we're in a golden age, the second golden age of comics right now. There's more great comics being created and put out, than they're having at any time. And we thought that this was a book that fit in that kind of that realm. Tracy, same question. Why comics? You're a prose author for the most part, as I understand. So, what's the attraction of comics for you?
Well, Roxane nominated me for this position. I did not seek it out. I was reluctant. I was scared. I was petrified, actually. But she believed in me. And once I started working in the process, it was easy, but super challenging at the same time. I was a fan of comics as a child. Like Roxane, I read Archie comics, horror comics, like Richie Rich. But since then, kind of that's kind of where my comics stayed, and now I'm more enamored of the genre, and I'm gonna try and seek out more books. I haven't done so. I was kind of buried in ours, but I like bought something like graphic novel of things like books that I've known in the narrative form, and I just see like the way the story can be told in a whole different way, and it's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Fight Club 2 is also really a fantastic sequel to Fight Club. It's you wouldn't have thought that you could do a sequel to Fight Club, but he managed to pull that off really well, I thought.
Yeah, and the illustrations are amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. Like I can't.
You're lucky that you're in Los Angeles because you've got a lot of really fantastic comic shops around you.
Oh yeah.
So it'll be very easy for you to dive in. Rebecca, you draw comics. Yeah, you've done multiple small comics and zines and things like that. Did you study comics? Did you go to school for comics or?
No, I went to school for like classical track, editorial and that type of thing. But I loved comics, and I remember in school doing a couple comics, and I was like, this is really sick, but I'm really terrible at it, and so I won't pursue this, and then I didn't. And then it all kind of fell into place later, but comics and like cartooning as a medium has been like my favorite thing for all of time, and remains, like, in my opinion, the highest form of art and narrative storytelling that you can achieve. It's something that I love completely with my whole heart, and it's something that I don't know, it seems like endless as a medium. People are finding new ways to adapt it and work with it and change it all the time, and I think, I hope that it continues to be treated that way as like a legitimate art and storytelling medium that can be twisted around and used in new ways forever.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's fantastic. It's an amazing art form that it's not. It does things that you can't do in other art forms. So maybe this brings me to the next question, and it's really the obvious one. So starting off as a short story that ran in Difficult Women here. I have a copy of this to hold up as well. Where did "Let's turn this into a comic" come from?
So, actually, probably almost 3 years now. Good Lord. Almost 3 years ago now, Boom Studios approached me and asked me if I wanted to write a graphic novel or a comic series for them. And I thought about it, and I said, yes, I would love to. I had been a fan of their work because they had published a graphic series called Slam about roller derby. And my friend Pamela Ribbon wrote it, and it was just so well done and so charming and so engaging. And I knew they could do beautiful work. And as I was thinking about what kind of story to write, I knew I didn't have the bandwidth at the time to write an original story, so I thought I might adapt something of mine. And I have a few stories in the realm of magical realism, and that felt like it would lend itself really well to this interplay between image and text. And so I took it from there. And I also knew that I didn't have the time to adapt it by myself. And so Tracy happens to be my best friend and also my favorite writer. And so I knew she would be a great partner in this.
That's fantastic. So how do you take a story from one medium to the other? It seems like it's a big challenge. Tracy, maybe do you want to tackle that at first?
Yeah, I don't know how one does it. I just know how I did it. I'd never done it before. So first things first was Roxane's story pretty much starts with the son getting taken away from the world, and it follows the story of Joshua and Claire. Joshua is Hiram Hightower's son, who has to live with the legacy that his father flew an air machine into the sun and left the world in darkness. So what I wanted to explore was Hiram Hightower's journey, how he got to that point. So it kind of expanded the relationship between him and his wife and the backstory there in the before times when the world had a sun. And once Roxane and I agreed on we liked the place it was in, and Daphne, our publisher, enjoyed it, then I had to figure out the scripting part of it. So we had to kind of break down the scenes for the entire book, and how many pages per scene and how many panels per page of those scenes, and just start scripting. So that part was easy and hard. Easy because I'm a visual writer. So just taking the pictures in my head and getting them into these little squares on the page was easy, but taking this big narrative prose piece and condensing it down was hard, because I love language and I love that part of storytelling. That's the only way I've told stories. So it was kind of like but this part's so great. Like, how do I show that in this little panel? But that's when I started to realize, that's where the illustrator comes in. So I was just like, don't worry about that. Just get the story, the scenes on the page, and then they'll take it from there. And that's when we got Rebecca's wonderful work involved.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the art for sure, but let me stick with this just a little bit longer. So one of the things about the prose story is, I mean, we don't even know Claire's name in there. It's all that's first person narrative. Is that right? Yes, thank you. So the structure of this book is entirely different. I read the comic first, and then I read the short story, and I was really surprised just how kind of it's the same story, but they're completely different in terms of how they're constructed, in terms of where the emotional beats are. All of the scenes that are in the prose are there, but they have different weights than they do in this. It's like a reimagining of the story.
Really, with the adaptation, we had the template that was provided by the short story, and we expanded it and really thought about, where do we want to spend more of our narrative energy? Which parts of this story demand more telling? And so we wanted to explore how Hiram and Mara Hightower meet and fall in love. We wanted to pull apart Joshua and Claire's relationship more, and the aftermath after Hiram flies his air machine into the sun. And so when you pull the story apart and when you expand it, you absolutely are going to have different emotional beats because there's more story there. And so that part was really one of trial and error, and just trying to figure out, okay, where can this story go?
Yeah. The book is, I think I said at the top, I described it as a science fiction book. It's a very strong science fiction book, I think. Whereas the prose is, as you say, magical realism. It's not even 100% sure like where the prose takes place. Whereas this clearly must be set in a physical world because you can see it and it's drawn. Did that change your perception of the story? Or your perception of the characters even? Or did I ask that badly?
I'm not sure. I think
Oh, there we go.
There.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think our perceptions changed in as much as our understanding grew. And we got to know the characters better, and we got to know their stories better. And so I think we had the same ideas about who they were, but they just expanded. And so did our understanding, and so did our ability to tell more story about them.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say about more understanding, because you wrote the original story. I didn't. So I had to create the higher Mara story, but also then I had to get in your head of Claire and Joshua and understand them more fully as I scripted those already kind of constructed parts. So that was interesting for me to be like getting in kind of your process, your characters' heads. And that was, and learning more about them where you had already, you know, given them to the world basically.
Yeah.
How much did you sort of pre-talk this out, and how much, Tracy, was you just grabbing a blank page and starting to write?
I honestly forget. Did we decide up front, like that's where the story could obviously be expanded? I feel like, right?
So what we did is we did some pre-talking. We actually live like, I think 4 or 5 miles apart. And so we were able to sit in the same room and do some of that. And then we outlined together so that we would be on the same page about where the story was going to go. And then Tracy did the scene work, and then I took a second pass. And so she was on her own, and I trusted her. And I think one of the best things about this collaboration is that all 3 of us trusted each other to do what we do best, without stepping on anyone's toes or micromanaging or trying to control that process.
Yeah, that's usually the best way to collaborate.
It is. It makes for happy creators.
Yeah. Rebecca, when did you get in? At what point did you get involved? What existed?
So I came in when there was a completed comic script, and I was pretty much given like a small amount of the script, and they were like, "Hey, can you draw a couple pages from this? We want to see what this looks like." And I did, and they were like, "All right, you want to do the book?" And that's what I did. I had a finished script, and which pretty much offers like a panel by panel description of what's going on, and then my job is to kind of use what I know how to do to determine how to sort of piece it together so that it looks nice and is also readable as like illustration as language. Make sure that everybody can kind of tell what's going on. Don't have to rely too much on either words or pictures to have like a nice balance of the two. And I plugged through.
Yeah. So how much of that would you say was on the page already in terms of the storytelling, the flow of it, right? Versus you needing to make editorial decisions like, oh, this needs to it needs to go this way to be a comic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I stayed pretty much true to the script. There were small moments where I influenced the pacing of things, or hitting certain points more by like shifting things around or reducing the number of panels on a page or expanding those or organizing what was happening on whatever page or spread in a way that sort of worked better in terms of like pure comic page format, which is like, that's my job and that's where I come in. So script more or less exactly as written, with minor changes to the organization of page and things like that.
Yeah, you've mostly been doing mini comics and things. I from what I could tell online, which is never always true. But from what I could tell online, you like the longest thing you had done was kind of 12, 13 pages maybe.
Yeah, I've mostly done short stuff.
Yeah. So what was it like making the step from doing 13 pages of comics? That you said that you didn't even really like the comics that you had done, right? I gotta draw a 200-page book.
Well, lucky for me, I've done some work in cartoons, like in animation, which is drawing hundreds and hundreds of drawings to complete one story. So I feel like that prepared me for it. I feel like learning doing animation work like as a hobby when I was a kid and then as an adult for work prepared me pretty well for this type of thing. But also for all of my short comics, I think being the writer and penciler and inker and colorist really limits what you can do unless you have like a publisher with a giant advance. So having these excellent writers who have already written the comic and this whole team of people meant that my job was like extremely well accommodated and I had the opportunity to just focus on designing it and drawing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I kind of the same question back to the writers. Roxane, the only other comics you had written, well, you wrote The Banks, I guess, at that point, which was 80 pages long, something like that, I think. But otherwise, it was The World of Wakanda, which were 20, 22 page stories. What are the differences? What are the challenges that you see between working between that sort of that shorter episodic format and a bigger, wider format like this?
With World of Wakanda, it was just you had so few pages to really tell the story. And those page limits were strict. There was no sort of, oh, can I have a couple more pages or anything like that? And so you had to learn how to be really economical in telling the biggest story possible in this limited amount of space. And when you are working in at least this long form graphic novel format, we had 120 pages to work with. And that gives you so many opportunities to really pull apart a story and have subplots. And, there's like one page that's just a tree. And that's like, I think it's my favorite page in the book. And so you also have more time to spend on some of the quiet moments. Whereas with an action comic, a superhero comic, every single page has to have a climactic narrative note.
Yeah. Do you think that's is that good? Is that bad? Is it just what it is?
I think that there's good in every single way of doing comics and graphic novels. I think that there's a time and a place for each thing. I understand the nature of the superhero genre. And the thing is that, especially in recent years, we've seen a lot of different kinds of people telling superhero narratives. And so we're seeing different kinds of storytelling in the genre, and that's great. And with graphic novels, sometimes you really want to sit with the story and sink in and not have to wait until the next week for finding out what happens next. And so it can be incredibly satisfying in the same way that a really long novel is incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. Did you, so you were talking about the need to have some sort of climactic moment, on every page, or at least in every page turn. How is that different in your mind from the climactic moment that you have to have at the end of the issue? If you see what I mean, right? Like, because each story has to build to a point. And the interesting thing about the sort of the nature of a serial comic, like Wakanda at least, is you have sort of 6 narrative points in an arc that you've got to reach. That's very different than any other kind of writing I imagine you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope that it's not that different from my novel writing. I hope that there is something exciting happening in every chapter, or not. Exciting is not necessarily the word, but I would say engaging, actively engaging. But with comics, you have, 22 pages, 24 pages, and that's it. And it is unique among my body of work. It's absolutely unique. The only thing that's similar is writing half-hour episodic television, because a half-hour television show on streamers, it can be anywhere from like 28 to, or I would say 24 to 34 minutes. But for television, it's generally around 21, 22 minutes. And you think that's a lot of space, but it's not. And so there is, I think, a similarity between comics and half-hour television.
Yeah. The argument I think I might make, and please tell me if this is a fallacious one, is that being forced to write to a limit can really help the way that you build a story and the way that you
Oh yeah.
Start to recognize what's important about the story, because comics have to be reductive, right? In a very real way.
Absolutely. And I definitely would love to hear what Rebecca and Tracy think, but it's like Twitter also. Twitter has made me a better writer because especially when it was 140 characters, economy of language. How can you say something interesting and that will hold your audience's attention within 140 characters? And of course, you can thread tweets and so on, but still, each tweet has to matter and it has to have a punch. And so you really start to think and learn about extraneous nonsense in your language. And I think the same absolutely goes for comics. I'm so grateful that I entered this world because I think it has done wonders for especially my fiction.
Tracy, you wanna sort of tackle the same kind of themes there?
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's basically a translation, taking this long form and condensing it down into this, graphic narrative form. And it is like, what are the most important points of this story that need to be in this book to make it make sense to the reader that maybe has never read the original story. So it's a lot of like just making hard decisions and making sure once you've made those decisions that the scope of it makes sense from beginning to end. And like Roxane says, it's how to use the story beats to make sense just in this shorter format. And that was the challenging part because, I loved everything that was in the original, but it couldn't fit in the graphic novel. So,
yeah. Are you outlining a project like this? Before you start, what's your process here?
Yes, we absolutely outline this project. And actually, I don't think either Tracy or I are big outliners in our normal writing. But I've outlined in every comic project I've done. And I understand why. It's also like in film and television, there's a lot of outlining. So that before you commit to something that has a lot of other people who are going to be involved in the process, like, please know what you're talking about so that we can meet our deadlines to pass this on to the artist, especially with graphic novels. They take quite a long time to produce. I don't think people realize how long, to do them well, I should say. And so we outlined so that we would have a sense of where we were going, so that Boom would have a sense of where we were going, and so that it would make it easier for the actual scripting process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you have the agreed upon outline and the beats on the expansion of the story, then I could rest easier to like, okay, now I'm going to make it all pretty and fill in the blanks and make it look nice without like having to turn just that in and then get crushed when they're like, no, we hate this. So yeah, outline first.
You're outlining, particularly because you essentially added a whole second subplot between both of the two relationships, the relationship in the past and the relationship in the present. And so they've got to get sort of relatively equal space, I suppose. When you're outlining it, because you guys had never done Tracy, you hadn't done comics before. How much were you thinking about, or were you thinking at all about, every 2 pages is the turn, right? Like in terms of, no, not at all.
No, well, I didn't know to do that until I got into the scripting. Yeah. I was just like, okay, let me get the story. Okay, once that was down, then okay, now it's scripting. And then when we started turning those pages into Boom, that's when our editor Daphne would come back going, oh, well, if you condense this panel into that one, or, subtract it and, mind meld it into these guys, when the page turns, then it's going to be like, I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of that. So it was great to have someone who actually knew what she was doing, kind of coaching me through that. I mean, I didn't think of it at all.
Yeah. Roxane, anything to talk about the page turn at all, or was that when you were doing the Marvel comics, was like learning that sort of that skill of the beat has to be here is the beat,
Absolutely. learned quite a lot from my editor at Marvel, Will Moss, who was really good about teaching me where to end things on the page and where to end things on the issue and where to sort of mark the beats in a given issue. And then my editor at TKO, for both the series I'm working on for them, is also amazing at storytelling and finding those beats. And I just am so grateful for these editors because it really has helped me find that moment. And my editor at TKO, his name is Sebastian Greiner. And so, yeah, I first started thinking about ending, like finding those right beats with the YA novel and series, The Hunger Games, because The Hunger Games, every single chapter ends on a cliffhanger. And it's really quite remarkable how she manages to do that. And ever since I read that, I have been trying to apply it to my own fiction and also to comics. And it's a really great model for anyone who's looking for how to keep storytelling aggressively interesting.
Yeah, very much so. Rebecca, you're given the script, and it's got a bunch of ideas in it, and it's got a bunch of description. What do you do to then focus on what it is the page actually needs? Do you start thumbnailing out first? Do you draw and redraw a lot? Is your first hot take usually the best? Talk us through your process.
So in this type of project, when there are a bunch of other people involved, definitely thorough thumbnails are a necessity. So I thumbed the entire book before going in and starting, penciling and inking pages, which was done digitally on this book. So that went in, and then I'm gonna say that I more or less always stick with my first take. The thumbs I work on more thoroughly because you get to see not just what each panel looks like in terms of like composition, but the entire page, which is like, I think, an important thing that gets overlooked sometimes, that each page is its own artwork and then each panel within that is its own artwork. And so each one has to look good and they have to look good together as a whole, and they have to function as like a narrative storytelling. So the thumbnailing is definitely like a really important part of something of this size. And because you don't want things to get too like muddy looking or samey. So it was thumbs, and then it was go in with digital inks and draw the whole book for my thumbs.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder. I always kind of wonder this about how artists work when so you're drawing digitally a project. Do you have like a copy of the script on the screen at the same time? Like,
yes.
What's your typical, have you like highlighted parts of the script to like jog?
Oh my gosh!
Like, what's your
actually
wrestling with it at the beginning?
So I have like maybe not the most efficient way of doing this, but I split my screen, so I have a Word file open on like 1/6 of my screen, and then I have my drawing screen over here. And I do this for like all of my own scripting and whatever. I just keep a Word file open so that I can just be like, what is happening. But it's good to like continuously check over and over and over, or else I'm going to draw something really cool and then I have to erase it because it's not relevant to the story at all. So that's yeah, I have to be looking constantly because I am like a complete scatterbrain, and if I don't like have it right in front of me constantly, it's going to be a massive mess.
Yeah. How detailed are your thumbs? Are you drawing?
They are not at all. They're just like big blob and then smaller blobs, and like I like to know where I'm putting like spot black versus like empty areas for the colors to work with, or like my own line weight, because you can really easily end up with a page that's like super dark heavy on the bottom and super light heavy on top, and then you have a really heavy looking page. You have to balance this stuff out. And then things like, if you end up with a page that's all line work, you have nothing to like anchor it anywhere. You have no spot blacks, and it's just like this floaty, empty looking page you don't really you're not pacing the eye from like top left to bottom right if you don't have weight in each panel to pull you from one to the other. So this is like my favorite part of like all of this stuff. It's like this super basic compositional stuff. And so it's mostly just blobs, and then I like got really felt really bad at one point submitting thumbs, and it would just be like big blobs with like Hiram written on one blob, and then like Mara written on another blob. I knew what it meant, probably didn't look like much, but so yep.
Yeah, so I mean, working in animation is, I understand. I mean, that's a great way to train yourself to draw and things.
Yeah.
But the problem solving of a page and the weight of a page and the shape of a page doesn't exist in animation, right? Because everything is always in the same frame no matter what, right?
Yeah, it's definitely it's different.
So where does your philosophy come from on this? Like, how did you learn? Is it self-taught? That
I think some of it's instinctual, just from doing stuff over and over and being like, that looks bad. Why does it look bad? Let me draw it again until it looks not bad. And then a lot of it is like, this is the boring answer that everybody hates, but it's like learning traditional compositional rules, which is, nobody likes that answer at all. But and not even like necessary to like any particular school of thought or like actual proper education on the subject, but more like understanding the idea of balance and compositional balance and like really basic ideas like line weight and like how to move your eye from one thing to the next, which is all sort of a part of like basic composition, which I mostly think I probably learned from just, you're in school or you're a kid and you copy stuff that's good already, and then hopefully it gets smushed in there somewhere.
No, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
In terms of the script, did you guys write it sort of screenplay style, where it's, here's what the room looks like, here's the action, here's some dialogue, or how did you write? Talk to me about that.
Broke it down by page and then panel. So page 1, panel 2, and then describing what each panel should look like. And then, of course, the dialogue and the characters who would be populating that panel, what they might be wearing. So in many ways, it was screenplay style, yes, but just formatted differently.
Yeah. Not limitation, the boundaries of the page are what makes comics. And so in the scripting process, how much are you thinking about, here's the landscape that I have. I've got 6 to 8 panels kind of at most that I can communicate an idea. And in a lot of cases, they're probably, 3 to 5, really. How much is this bearing on your writing process? Or is it all just kind of getting fixed in post, as it were?
Well, in the beginning, after we wrote the story and we knew our page limitations, we kind of had to list out all the scenes we wanted in the book. And we had one column with pages and panels, and then it had to add up to 120 pages. So I had to go through and figure out, okay, well, how many pages and panels is a wedding scene? And okay, I'm guessing, okay, I read the scene and I'm guessing, okay, well, they're going to look at each other lustfully in this one, and the priest is going to be in this one, and then and I just kind of had to, spitball it, put that down, make sure everything added up to 120, but then, turn that into boom. They're happy with it. But then once you start scripting, you're like, oh, well, let's see. Maybe I can shave some off of that scene and add it into this scene because I need a big picture of the tree with them getting married on one page. I mean, that's going to be spectacular. And I just, okay, so it was kind of like a lot of, it wasn't a guideline, but, we played with that guideline because it's fluid as you're writing it or scripting it. What's going to be more important, or like what scene needs to have its own page or like its own bottom panel. So yeah, it was just a process.
Yeah, comics are a fascinating language because depending on how much space it takes and how you cut things, it can totally change the emotional content of an image or a thought. You're right that the sequence of the tree has to be a full page, and you also, as an author, can control time in a way that you kind of can't in other media. Film animation goes by at the number of frames per second that it is. You can't change that. You cannot change physics, right? But in comics, you kind of can change physics on a page-to-page basis, yeah?
Yeah, no, you have a lot of really cool advantages in terms of being able to like bend time and also do your best to manipulate the people reading it to spend more time with you on certain pages and in certain moments, as opposed to there are pages or drawings that are more utilitarian than others. They're there to drive the story. We know what's going on and we're understanding what's happening, as opposed to scenes like the tree where you want somebody to stay there for a minute. And that type of thing is really cool and really unique to comics, I feel like.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, we can talk more about craft itself a bit, but I hear we have a question from the audience that we were going to put up. A question from the audience. If anybody's watching at home and you have another question, please ask, and we'll get it in the thing. Rodrigo, who watches these every time, and he's I think our questioner. Always in the design of the story to have coloring play a narrative role.
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. The color story ended up being different than what particularly I anticipated. Originally, I imagined having the beginning of the story and all of the flashbacks in like bright, saturated colors, and then having the present of the story with the sun disappearing in black and white, and then at the end sort of showing a bit of color to show that maybe the light was returning to this world. And when James Fenner, who was the colorist for this project, turned in his initial sample, it was clear that he had a different color vision for the story, but it was incredible. And I love the way that it complements and enhances the story.
Yeah, no, I agree. Rebecca, since it's coloring your work, will you tackle the same question?
In terms of how like light and darkness played into my contribution, we had all talked about this from the beginning. I tried to guide some of it in terms of like how much I was leaving room for James to color, as opposed to areas where I was using much more black and much more rendering to sort of fill in the darker scenes to feel more ink heavy and reflect more that there is no sunlight. But yeah, I did not know what to expect in terms of how color was going to be approached in the final iteration, and James crushed it. I honestly didn't have any kind of like expectation for it, but it's really sick. I've never seen anybody combine, especially because he's combining warm colors and cool colors in a way that kind of shouldn't. They like feel like they should compete, and they don't at all. They build like this super unique palette that's super unique to this world that we're spending time in. It's awesome.
Yeah. Did you have? It sounds like you didn't have much or any input into this.
I had input as the artist. Like I definitely talked to Daphne about sort of like what my thoughts were, but I didn't know. I was doing my part of it, and then they were like, we found a colorist, and yeah, that was all James. James did it, and he did it awesome.
Yeah. Were you did you have a different color picture in mind when you were drawing, or did you just not know? You were just like, I'm drawing in black. I'm just thinking.
There were like, save for maybe a couple of scenes that like as I was drawing it, I was like, I have been here in my memory. I know what I remember X, Y, and Z looking like, because you pull reference from everything. So like, there are a couple scenes that I felt I knew what it looked like in the end. And then it did not look like that, and it's so much better that way, because it isn't, it's me applying what I'm drawing to this world and not some like reflection of where I've been, and it's so much better that way. That in terms of how it ended up looking, it really is a cooperation equally of every single person who worked on it, which is, I think it's so much better that way. It's so cool to see everybody's part so clearly.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's really cool. James's name is on the cover, which is not necessarily a thing that is standard in comics.
For colorists.
Is a decision of the team to have him on the cover as well, or?
That was Boom's decision, and definitely one I would think we were all on board with.
Oh yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize about comics is that a lot of artists put a lot of work and energy into it. You have the writers and the inker and the colorist and the letterer, and sometimes those are the same person, but rarely. And so I think everyone deserves everyone deserves credit and deserves a cover shot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's see, we have another question, I am told. Jordan will put it up. Also, Rodrigo again. Can you comment on the Claire and Joshua embrace image that gets broken up into 4 panels?
One of the best images.
Oh, you have it right
because
there.
it's
Wow,
so awesome.
look at that.
Yeah, very good, very good, very good.
Yeah.
So comment.
It's one of my favorite panels. That and the tree, honestly.
We got some classics, but that one, I guess I was just talking about like the image of the passing of time, and usually when you have a couple of panels, you're looking at different things happening sequentially over time, and this was all one moment that was lasting a little bit longer, so that's why I did it.
Yeah. So in the original script, was it just this is a single panel and you broke it up into 4, or was that?
I couldn't tell you. It's been a minute.
Yeah. I was thinking that too when you're talking about how you would change things in the script to allow, and I don't remember how I scripted that page, but
I think it was the splash page originally, which it still is, essentially.
Yeah, because I just love it. I love that page with her leg over his arm, and
she's cute. Yeah,
she's cute.
She's doing cute stuff. I love her.
And it's amazing how simply just breaking it up into panels changes the time and changes the emotion on the page in such a fundamental way. It's the thing that I love about comics. It's the reason that we do things like this and we talk about comics and making comics. Yeah. Is there anything comparable to writing comics? Is there a way to bring your experiences in doing comics to prose, I guess is the question that I'm trying to ask there.
Like the reverse way?
Yeah, the reverse way. Like in terms of timing and technique, and is there a lesson that you learned the other way around?
I guess for me, just the emphasis on the scene. So knowing how important that is in this format just makes me, craft that into my prose writing to make sure, pay more attention to that. I never went to school for writing, so I've always been kind of freestyling. So it kind of just, emphasized the importance of scene and pacing of scenes. And so that's probably what I learned.
Okay. Roxane, anything from you?
Yes, I would say the same thing, actually. Learning pacing and scene, or I guess not learning, but really deepening that skill set. And also remembering that even when you're reading something, you want it to feel visual. And so when you're writing a script for a comic, you have to really articulate everything that you want to see on the page. And certainly the artist will then impose their vision on it. But you have to start somewhere. And so it has encouraged me to think more visually in my own work about how do I really set the scene for the reader so that they can feel like they are immersed in whatever story I'm trying to tell. Yeah.
Have you at any point done your own thumbnails, just sort of to try to work it out, or to work out a storytelling problem on your own?
Yes and no. The thing is, I can't draw, and so when I do like thumbnails,
that's the great thing about thumbnails, right? You know?
Yeah, it's really the great thing. What I do when I work in thumbnails is I actually just write words in them.
Yeah.
And so I do something of it, but not in the way that it really should be done.
Sure. Tracy, anything on that from you?
I have a vague recollection. I have a vague recollection of getting 8.5 by 11 paper and just writing squares, because I was just like, I had to wrap my head around how this whole thing worked, and just so I think in the beginning I remember like doing some of those, which I probably burned.
Yeah.
But once I got going and kind of understood how it worked, yeah, I did not suffer myself through that anymore.
Yeah. Was it difficult to figure out the number of words that you could fit on a page?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good question. I never knew, because I love language and my writing's very language heavy. And I'm like, oh, but if I cut out all these adjectives, then it's so plain. But I just had to stick to what was important and what would convey, translate the story again into the visual format and kill all my darlings. And so, yeah, but I was like, am I being too verbose here? Like, are they going to just chop this because it's this big? But they weren't that bad, right?
No. Yeah, I'm the adjective. That's my job.
Yes, you're the adjective. Really,
I feel like when I was like first starting to try to actually figure out comics just for myself with like shitty little zines and stuff like that, was I was so unhappy with like how much panel space would be taken up with like giant dialogue bubbles. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like not the point of this, is for me to just like write 500 things and then have like a little picture this big at the bottom. That's not what this is for. And I was so frustrated forever that like that it just like doesn't work at all.
Yeah, there's we lost Roxane. I guess.
Back.
There's an interesting tension between captions and dialogue, right? Because you want captions because they're things that you can only communicate in captions, right? That would sound weird or wrong if you did dialogue. But by the same time, you don't want to have anything in a caption that the art is communicating.
Yeah.
Or if you do, you're reinforcing the art, right? So did you understand any of that tension when you were writing it, Tracy?
I don't know about tension as much as I wanted to do right by the story, and I wanted the reader to understand where they were in the story. Like, so a lot of starting some of the captions with in the before, da 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 da, in the after, da 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 da. And I think actually I did a mixture of not doing that and doing that. And then we decided to make it more specific. We kind of started to add in the before and in the after at the beginning of a lot of the captions, because first we had written the story linear, and then we decided to script it. Like once we had that, like, well, how about we do it like we'll do the after and then we'll put the before and then the after. And so we had to kind of mix it up. So to make sure the reader knew where they were in the story, the caption we started putting in the before, in the after. And then, yeah, caption really helped me a lot because of how much prose there was to kind of set the scene. And then I could go into the dialogue once that was kind of established. So I knew, or I felt confident the reader would know what was going on.
Yeah. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on terms of captions versus dialogue?
I use both a lot depending on what kind of comics I'm doing. I mean, not in I don't usually in more narrative stuff, but in I do a lot of web comics and that kind of thing. And for those, it's like a really helpful tool to like set a scene and then have an example of that scene if you're trying to do something really specific, as opposed to and if you're trying to get something done snappy, like it can help a lot, at least the way I do it. But Yeah, it can take less time. Like it might take pages to explain a scenario that could so much more efficiently be told by a narrative voice.
Yeah. Roxane, we were talking about the differences in comics, particularly between the caption, the narrative caption, and dialogue in terms of moving the story forward. Did you have any thoughts on sort of the interplay between those things?
Yeah, the thing about captions is I try to use them judiciously because you don't want to rely too heavily on this sort of external narration that reminds you that you are reading fiction, and I think it can pull the reader out of the story. But at the same time, sometimes you need to orient the reader in time and place, or you need to indicate that they've moved through time in some way. And so I think they're an incredibly important tool, but I think they have to be used well. And I think that sometimes people rely too heavily on them to do the work of storytelling that should be done either through dialogue or through description.
Yeah. So a lot of the narrative devices you have in prose don't necessarily work particularly well in comics. When I was reading the short story, there was I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was a line something like "he shrugged into her arms," and I visually I construct that in my brain. I know what that means, but there's not a way to communicate that in comics, right? Because comics doesn't have enough move. You can do it, but you've got to spend 2 or 3
But
panels.
it's tough. Yeah,
right?
action's tough.
Yeah, action's tough. So where's the challenge there? Is there an easy path through? How do you conquer those kinds of problems?
When I figure it out, I'll let you know. I catch myself sometimes when I'm writing a comic scene where I'll say things like "she sighed" or she put her hand on her hips and walks across the room, and it's like I try to do that in like one line of information in a panel, and then I'm like, oh my god, I literally need to make sure that this is like in 3 panels so we can see the action happening. It's hard. It's really hard to move from what you can do in prose to what will work in comics.
Yeah. And it seems to me that one of the tricks in prose also is to try to engage the senses, right? That the richer writing is that it engages your other senses that are not just your eyes and your brain. But again, in comics, that's much harder to make work. It's hard to make a smell work in comic, Sometimes you can make it work like music. Music works very nicely in comics, because you can see it flow through a panel, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
Use a lettering technique or something. Do you think about these things much when you're writing it, or is it more a problem to be solved later? I don't know if that was a good question or not.
I can't say that I think about it too much. When I'm writing, I just write, and then I go back through to sort of see, okay, is what I wrote even remotely possible? And is an artist going to be able to look at what I wrote and be able to render it without pulling her hair out?
I gotta thank you, Roxane.
Like, what the fuck? Yeah.
Those thoughts are what make you a good comic writer. That's the kind of thing and everything else, but like those things are so cool to keep in mind. Oh man.
Were there any points in the script where you were like, oh, I don't know how to draw this?
I know one scene that I didn't know how to write, and I just hoped I put it all on Rebecca basically, and she totally killed it, which was kind of like when Joshua and Claire are growing up in the Roxane story. It's a lot of pages of what he endured, and they grew up through middle school and then high school, and then how their friendship blossomed into romantic. And I'm like, and I only have a certain amount of pages for it, so I'm just like, make these pages a blur of just this stuff happening. Go, and then she just made it look nice and make sense.
That was actually those like the montagey bits ended up being some of my favorite stuff to draw because I got to draw like a chronological story happening without panels. I was like, ooh, I can just like stretch this out. That was really cool, actually. So not the hell that you think it was. That was really neat.
It was hell for me, but you made it work.
Imagine. God, that must have been really tough to write.
Because also I didn't know. I'm just saying make all this stuff happen on these pages, but I don't even know if I'm following the rules of writing comics. Like I didn't know, and I just put it there.
The only big rule is you can't have two actions in one panel because it's not moving, and that's like it. That's all. That's the only thing that matters.
Okay.
Well, you've got some camera rules too, right? Like you can't move.
Yeah, it's.
Between panels.
It would just be weird and not. Yeah.
Another question. Pop it up. Debbie Bard. Hello, Debbie. Good to see you, by the way. The character of Mara has really stayed with me. Can you say more about how you developed her for the graphic novel?
Tracy?
So novel where she, in the short story, she's kind of not a character of her own.
Yeah, I kind of took the parts of Mara I knew from the short story and just tried to imagine who she was leading up to that. I don't know. I just really put myself into her place and the love she had for this man and kind of go backwards in time. And then, Roxane, of course, had input because, she wrote Mara to begin with. But it was just putting myself in this is what I do, put myself in the place of the characters and just write from that space. And, Roxane making sure I stayed within her lines.
Yeah. Were there any lines? I mean, how much did you really think through Mara and Hightower's relationship? Other than just sort of an incidental to the narrative you were telling at the time. Because I don't know if I ask these questions not well.
You're doing great.
Well, their story wasn't incidental. One of the things, especially in the graphic novel, that we wanted to do with Mara and Hiram's relationship is to make it clear that Hiram was leaving behind people he deeply loved. And so we wanted to make sure that their relationship was beautifully written and portrayed so that people could understand how much pain he was in to fly his air machine into the sun. And that's not a spoiler. It happens at the very beginning of the book. And so you have to give that relationship depth and heft, and you have to also understand why it would be years before Mara would return to herself and get over her grief, because she wasn't mourning like a bad husband or a mediocre husband. She was mourning the loss of a really great husband.
Yeah, it's interesting because the narrative thrust, obviously, in the short story is Claire, who's again unnamed in the story. So when I said incidental, that was what I meant. Not that the relationship was incidental, but it was incidental to the narrative that you were telling. And so anyway, the thing I was wanting to say there is that in the prose, it's kind of narratively, it felt to me much more about sort of hope rather than the plot of the story. Whereas in the graphic novel, it's very much a science fiction story, kind of first, and a romance, a science fiction romance, more than just hope. Did I say that right?
I would say that the short story was more of a character study that happened to be set against a science fiction backdrop. And in the graphic novel, because it's this marriage between prose and image, the science fiction aspects were front and center. And especially, Tracy came up with Flareon. Like, there was always this substance, but in the short story, I never bothered to name it. It just is. And the air machine, we see it. You can see the world shrouded in darkness, and you can see the councils persecuting the Hightower family. And so the science fiction elements are front and center. And so is the love story. And so it's the character study is there, but it's not as pronounced as the narrative study.
Yeah, because in the prose, it doesn't really matter if the darkness gets resolved. But in a book like this, it kind of has to, at the length that it is and the nature of the story. So that's a really interesting challenge, Tracy, maybe to say to put a narrative ending on something that didn't have a narrative ending in its original form.
Yeah, I think we needed a little hopeful ending and maybe a cliffhanger. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Everyone seemed happy with ending it that way. So
yeah, very good. Well, I think the graphic novel is fantastic, and again, reading it before I read the prose, it really surprised me that this came of that these two things got related. It's kind of more amazing to me, and I liked the book to begin with. So good job to all.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay there. I wanted to ask about the question of representation in comics, because Roxane, I think that you have things to say about this. Your protagonists have generally been people of color, have generally been you, and you read Archie's, you said. Not a lot of you in Archie.
Well, yes and no. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and I grew up in the suburbs. And so I think I was drawn to the Archie comics because actually it was something that I could relate to. And that was great. And yet there were no people of color in the Archie comics. Riverdale was this sort of completely whitewashed town. And when I write stories, I definitely want to write stories where people who look like me, who know what it means to be Black or to be a woman or to be queer in America, can see something of themselves. The thing is, when we read, we're not looking for a mirror most of the time, but it is great to know that reflection is possible and that stories like yours matter. And so I especially was grateful to be able to tell a story like this and to populate it with Black people, well, brown people, because Black is not really our skin color anyway. Okay. To be able to populate it with Black people, but it's not explicitly about race.
Yeah.
They happen to be Black, but this is an awesome science fiction story. And I'm so excited to be at a stage in my career where I get to do that kind of storytelling, because people tend to forget. I mean, race is always going to be there and racism is always going to be there. But this was not a story about racism. It was actually a story about class-based oppression and greed. And it was just exciting to be able to tell this kind of story.
Yeah, no, very, very much. And I really appreciate the notion that just because people are of a certain race as protagonists, that the story has to be about race.
Right.
We never would even consider that with white protagonists. So it seems very odd to me that there's like sort of this perception that it would have to be that way with people of color or non-traditional non-traditional, that's the wrong way to put it. But you know what I mean.
No, I totally know what you mean. And you're right. Like, the thing is, if you're writing a story with a character who has a disability, you want to portray their life realistically, but it doesn't have to be strictly about that. Like, they have an entire life and an identity that is not solely informed by ability. And that can go for any form of difference. And I will know that we have truly reached the promised land when more creators of color, queer creators, anyone who's underrepresented gets to tell the stories that they want to tell without having to directly tie those stories to their identity. And we're starting to actually see that. But I call it the Wes Anderson effect. Like when we get to have quirky little Wes Anderson stories, we will really have achieved equality.
Yeah. No, we're getting there. We're getting there.
We are.
And I think the comics are doing its part by and large. Access. The best thing about comics in a lot of ways is that all you need is a pen and an idea, right? And you can actually access the market in a way that and make a living at it that you may not be able to in prose. Say, you certainly can't just start making movies, unless you've got some money somewhere or access to things, So I love the democratization of the medium that comics is, but I'm battling now. So let's wrap this up a little bit. Last 2 questions. Let's go with question number 1. We have many aspiring cartoonists, aspiring writers, aspiring people who want to do comics, who watch these videos, because we talk to a lot of fantastic creative people. What would be your single piece of advice that you might give someone who wants to do comics? Whether it's a craft thing, whether it's just sort of a rah-rah. Rebecca, do you wanna start?
Yeah, I live by the rule that it doesn't have to be good; it just has to be done, and that's I think most aspiring comic artists or cartoonists that I talk to, have these grand visions of doing the equivalent of the Lord of the Rings, and haven't drawn a single panel comic yet because it has to be perfect. Every part of it has to be perfect, and they're rewriting this 800-page manuscript forever. And it's better to just kind of start and have it be bad, because you're probably going to redo everything you do 3 more times anyway. And I think that I feel like a lot of people think that they need to be super confident or at the top of their game to make things, but like Roxane was talking about yesterday, I think that I forget your exact quote, Roxane, but you are the artist at the time that you're making what you're making, and hopefully you get better over time. And I think expecting to come out of the gate guns blazing it's not going to happen. I got into this game really late, actually. I went to art school late. I graduated late. I started my career late, and I'm chugging along late, and that's fine. I hope I get better forever over time, and I think that's probably a good attitude to have about starting out.
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic answer, because you got to make comics in order.
Yeah, got to do it, and they're gonna be bad. They're probably gonna be bad in the beginning. I'm always gonna hope to continue growing forever, and I think that with that attitude, it kind of doesn't matter if your early comics weren't good.
Exactly. Tracy, do you have a piece of advice or tip, anything?
I don't know. I was roped into this, and I would say, if you're a writer looking to translate your work into the comic world, just pick something, a piece of work that you love that's visual, that maybe has characters you'd love to see rendered, and maybe pick up a few how-to books or watch some YouTube videos and take a stab at scripting. And maybe if you have an artist friend that would like to work on it, say, hey, do you want to create something together? I mean, there's no right or wrong. It's just create,
What YouTube videos were you watching?
I was watching none.
Actually, I didn't even.
Yeah, I'm sure they're out there. I mean, YouTube has everything. No, Roxane.
Not specific. Okay.
Yeah. Roxane shared some work she'd done. Boom gave me some stuff, so I just kind of took all that and made my own style. But I thought they'd just turn it back with red check marks, going, "You didn't follow the rules." But really, they're not hard and fast rules. Yeah, so don't be scared. I was scared, but now I'm not scared no more.
Yeah. Do you as a quick follow-up to that, are there other comics you would like to do? Do you sort of have the taste for comics now, or that was a cool experience, but you know.
Yeah. No, I'd love to do this again. Either if, I don't know if Sacrifice ever has a sequel. I have a novella that I wrote that I'd love to see on the page. You know, so if the opportunity arose, I would jump on it for sure. Yeah.
Nice. Roxane, do you have a piece of writing advice, of comics advice, of?
Yes, I would say that perfection isn't the goal. I think you can be excellent and flawed. And I wish that more younger creators understood that. And I also think young creators, and young is in terms of experience, not age. A lot of times people are like, and I see this in the fiction world too. Like, I've written a 380,000 word novel. Can you help me find a home for it? And it's, you know, I know the rules, or at least the norms of the community that you want to be a part of. Most debut novels are around 90,000 words. And certainly in genre fiction, you can get up into the 150,000 range, if not more. But no, like a 380,000 word novel is simply never going to be published. And so that's not to discourage you. It's to like say, maybe you need to break that up into a trilogy. And so I think it's important to have a sense of scope and scale when you think about like what your projects are going to be, and to recognize that you don't only get one project. Like, you get to create. That's the great thing about creativity. You can tell 100 stories. You're going to tell as many stories as you have the energy to tell. And so it's a kind of like, pace yourself, understand the community that you're writing into. Certainly all rules are made to be broken in the right ways, and also allow yourself to be edited. Take advice from people who have experience. They have experience for a reason. And that's not to say that they are the be all to end all, or that they are the final authority, but I have found that mentorship goes a long way.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Because rules are meant to be broken, but the rules are there for a reason in the first place. And having someone go, "Whoa, here's the lines, maybe," is very helpful. All right, let's wrap it up with the sort of the future plug question. Is there anything you guys would like to plug, be it comics or otherwise? Anywhere you'd like to send viewers to? We're always happy to listen to anything you have to say. Rebecca, would you like to go first?
Yeah, you can catch me in a couple months.
Okay.
Nothing to promote right now, yeah.
Tracy, you got anything you want to plug?
No, I have a novel in the hopper, and I'm working on another one, and nothing out there to point you towards, but
Okay.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Very good. Very good. Roxane, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
I would love to plug a book that came out this week it's called Black Futures, and it's co-edited by Jenna Wortham, and I can't remember the name of her co-editor, but it's a book of Afrofuturistic, it's a book of Afrofuturistic writing, and it's really well done. It's beautifully produced, and I hope people can check it out.
Great, that's fantastic. All right, well, the book this month was Sacrifice of Darkness. This is a fantastic book. It really is. It's a book of just heart and warmth, and it's romance, and it's science fiction, and it's beautiful, and it's got lots of good thoughts and big thoughts in it, and I cannot recommend it more than enough. We've been very lucky to be joined by Roxane Gay, Tracy Lynn Oliver, and Rebecca Kirby for this discussion, and I want to thank them all for being here and being part of this. So thank you all for that. Next month's book is Odessa. This is a great piece of post-apocalyptic futurism, and it's partially set in a destroyed San Francisco. So that gets points from us too. It's beautiful, and it's you'll see it's all in pink. It's all pink. It's a pink book. We've never had one of those before. That's very nice. The Kids Club next month is Mega Dogs of New Kansas. We'll have that next month. And our Classics Club, I will be talking to Scott MacLeod about understanding comics. and will help you understand comics better too. I think these are all going to be great conversations, so I hope you're able to join us for some or all of these. If you're not a member of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club, the Kids Club or the Classic Club, Jordan will put up the thing there in a second, and please join, because it's how the store stays alive. It's how we get to talk to artists and authors and do this on a regular basis. And I want to thank my crew here at the store. I want to thank Zoe and Kat for hanging around. I want to thank Jordan for running the show. I want to thank The Beat for being our sponsors. And I want to especially thank Tracy, Roxane, and Rebecca for The Sacrifice of Darkness, because I thought this was a fantastic story, a beautiful piece of work, and something that everybody at home should be reading. Until next month, we'll see you.
Thank you.